far people have taken procedures that I never dreamed I would see things like that. So someone else had a here.
I was just going to follow up on that same topic. I mean, I also make generative art, and lately I've been informing those choices in cognitive science as a framework in which to decide how, why one particular algorithm over another one would be used. So my question would be, how do you choose which algorithm or which particular way of thinking about a line through space becomes the one that you're going to use?
Well, I'm sure you're probably, if you're working with generative art, you're probably far beyond anything I've ever touched. But in fact, I think you're in the right world. So I'll say that first. I think you're in a very important, one of the most important things. We do not have, let me speak to that for one moment first. I'm an art historian. I've taught art history for 27 years. And often when I look at art history in the big sense, so let's take this point. I think it's very important before I even answer that other part. The important thing is this. If you look to the Renaissance, you begin to understand that what had happened was this gradual, over a period of time, a shift in human consciousness from thinking about the world from a revelation point of view to a measure of how humans looked and experienced the world. That's really what humanism was about at its root. But it was a radical change from what had preceded. Always in art, when you look at Egypt, you look at the Roman Empire, you look at medieval in the West, you look at China in various periods, everywhere that you look and see a tradition emerge in a great form, underneath it, there's always something that isn't otherwise. So what was it with the information revolution? Well, I think one of the things we inherited in the arts is the potential for a generative art, and that's the question here. So what informs you when you approach a generative procedure? Because a generative procedure is very different from anything that I know of historically. There are hints of it there are hints of it everywhere, but ultimately it's something with computing power that we can do today that we could not otherwise have done. And what informs that decision, for me, it was very elementary. I would set up, just give you an example. I could think to myself of this. I could think, for example, of, let me just take 1 minute to do this, so let me just get a better idea. And this is important, so we'll just see if I can get up. You could say, for example, what made the decision that this particular, if you want to know on this one here, for example, if you look at this shape right here, this character right here, what you see is the character that has a set of coordinates that controls every stroke. Every stroke in this piece is made on that information. Now, what informs that decision? That's your question. And what it was for me is simply very arbitrary. In establishing each of the control points that would be along that, in establishing each of the control points for the figure, I throw dice. And with experience, I learned what parameters work, not less than and not more than. So my X position will always end up being specified when I cast the dice. I will only accept an answer that's not more than and not less than. Okay, so you can understand that very well. So I do that in sequence, and then once I know one position, then I have another set of rules for the next position. But it's always the dice are thrown within those parameters and within that set of rules. So in a sense, I'm making the decision based on my preferences for the kind of form generator I want. And you could say, well, why do I want that one? Well, then you're going to ask Beethoven or, well, I'm not going to compare myself to that, but let's say it's a composer down the street. Why this tune rather than that? And I think that perhaps helps. But ultimately, yes, I think you do have to have a vision. I think you do have to have a place you're going. I'm so happy to hear your question. I have the greatest respect for the generative art people, and the works I'm seeing, but I'm an amateur by comparison. I just work with simple things. I'm really not even a good programmer. It's a lot of spaghetti, and it's almost embarrassing to show. So, anyway, thank you for the question. I appreciate it a lot.
Yes. Thank you. I liked very much in your presentation that while speaking of your art and your algorithmic approach,
Yes.
you spoke about epigenetic painting or
Yes.
epigenetic art and not of purely genetic art. And I would like to ask you tell us a little bit more about the part AP in your epigenetic approach.
Oh, yes.
Well,
That's very
thank you.
easy to explain. I'll use the microphone. The question is a very good question. Why did I use the term epigenesis rather than genetic? Well, at the time, the problem was finding a term, and the term genetic art, generative art, was not in usage at that time. My wife and I together worked very hard on this for my paper because she helped me a lot in thinking out some of the issues. When I was preparing my paper for Utrecht in 1988, by the way, Roger Milano was sitting, I don't know if he's here, but he was sitting in the front row. And I'll never forget that moment when I finished the paper and he jumped up and he said, Roman, I want to have that for Leonardo. Here was the issue. The issue was, what would be the correct terminology for this procedure? And we understood that there were so many analogs to how it happened in nature that we wanted to make the biological analog clear. And the truth of the matter is that epigenetic is more precise definition or analog than genetic. But for all practical purposes, generative is really a good way to go for terminology. Why? Because a genotype is in fact the code. You could think of it that way. In biology, the genotype is the code itself. The process by which the code unfolds, as it were. In other words, when the seed is planted, the seed could think of as having genotype in it, the code. You plant that acorn seed, and that's usually the analog I use when I give that lecture. And as the tree grows in biological terms, that is epigenesis. And in the end, the mature tree would be referred to as a genotype. So epigenesis is the term to use for the procedure. So in a sense, epigenetic would be okay. It's epigenetic art, but generative art I think is a better term. But that's what I use because I didn't know anything else. I just tried. And all my friends in biology said, well, it's an accurate analog term, and you could use that. So I did. And usually when I present the lecture, I show this. I do have a very nice lecture on that. Probably maybe I should have given that one. But it is a good question. I really appreciate it. I hope you'll look at my article. I'd say it's outdated. One of the things that we all set out to do, in case those of you who don't know, people like Harold Cohen, myself, in fact, I didn't know that Harold was doing the same thing I was trying to do, but he was doing much better than me, of course. But what was going on was this. Many of us were very intrigued by the computer. There's no question that it was very seductive. Once you had your head into it, you just couldn't let go. What drew us was the idea of artificial intelligence, and we thought, well, couldn't we make an intelligent art-generating system? So my program is actually a whole system. A lot of people would be surprised to see this in written. If somebody wants to see, I can have a little side session and show you the code and show you how it works. You'll be quite amazed. It's very elementary and it's written in BASIC. You could not imagine that it was intended to be an expert personal system. This is what Harold wanted. and he's still working on it. A few years ago, we were both at La Rural for the opening of that exhibition in Spain that was on art and tech. And what was interesting is that Harold is working on Aaron now in a very different way, and he's projecting it. I'm still with my pen well. But anyway, Harold's still going after that vision of his. I have to say that I have since then modified my own approach. Of course, it's hopeless that I could ever do what I set out to do. I'd have to learn a lot more. I'm not sure I ever could. But what I do as generative art is indeed generative. You know, I do have form generators. Very elementary, but they work. And so you could say it's generative, but the epigenesis was meant to describe the process. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Don't get me talking, you'll never stop. But thank you. Thank you. Okay, people. I think most of you here are doing so many fantastic things beyond anything I ever dreamed. I hope it was worthwhile for you to hear an old man talk about his past.
Okay, before you leave, oh my God, everybody's leaving already. Okay, stop. 1 second. Before you leave, if you look in your program, there are a few things that I would like to point out. First of all, we have an hammam evening. So the hammam is the Chamberlain hammam. It's in Sultanahmet. There is an artwork in there by Tom Corby. It's called the Southern Ocean Studies, and you can see the time, so we can all go there. And it's online. You can check exhibitions and events, and it will appear there. Southern Ocean Studies. And if I remember well the time, I don't want to misguide anyone. Just let's check. But I think it's about 6:30 till 10 o'clock. What it is at the entrance. Anytime you want, you can go. There is a cupola, and there is the artwork that is projected there. And then there are two inner areas where, in order for you to access that, you have to pay. I see people have a 20% discount on all hammam services. So if you take a massage, if you take a full bath, etc., you just show your card and you will get a 20% discount. That night in particular, though, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be spending time networking. You can, women on one side and men on one side, and then we can all go up on the terrace. There are drinks, food. You can order whatever you want, and you can have a nice time. That's something that I would like to remind you. And we will send a newsletter for all the events that are taking place tomorrow in order to keep you up to date, up to speed. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.